Voices to hear.
Hello everyone, and welcome to our podcast, Voices to Hear. My name is Dawid, and in today's episode, I'll be talking with Vase Amanito, an architectural photographer based in Skopje. Among many other projects, he's the eye behind the images featured in the Skopje modernist map published by Crowd Media, as part of a series of maps that celebrate unique urban spaces worldwide. In this podcast, we will discuss Skopje's modernist legacy within the local and international context. Vase, welcome, and thank you for joining me today.
Thank you, David, for the great introduction.
So maybe for those who may not be familiar with the topic, Skopje underwent a major transformation after a very destructive earthquake in 1963. How do you think that moment influenced the city's architectural direction?
Very interesting question. First of all, the earthquake in Skopje, it's a really sad and a good thing in a way. After the earthquake was the city where every architect wanted to do something about the city. They started to create all kinds of master plans. Even known Kenzo Tange came to Skopje to help reconstruct the city. So after all that injuries and bad things that happened to the city was rebuilt in a good way. All the architect that's working in that period was influenced by all the modernist architecture that was pushed in the world. So they have the chance to introduce it in our city. And as you said, Skopje has a lot of modernist architectural buildings, which some of them are on the map that we were doing it. But there are a lot of other buildings. We weren't able to put it on the map from various reasons. Some of the buildings which are still existing in Skopje, and we didn't have a chance to put it on the map. Some because they're transformed, some because it was a problem to make photo from those buildings because so behind some other buildings or hidden from some overgrown trees or some other things. So yeah, there are so much more that you can see in Skopje from that period. But when we starting with the earthquake, I wasn't alive when that happened, but from the older that I was talking about, the earthquake was early in the morning, so people were still sleeping, so that was so many deaths and injuries. The architecture that period in Skopje, it was not so seismically quality, so a lot of buildings collapsed and a lot of were collapsed after, so from security reasons. And in that places, the new architects and builders built some new modernist, usually, buildings.
Yeah, that's quite interesting that you mention, that there are so many of these buildings still present, and actually some of it was just like a logistics issue that you couldn't take photos of them. And I guess another one would be that the map is only so big, right? You can only fit so many photos in the publication as well.
I can't remember exactly, but we had some lists that we tried to put it on the map. Yes, some of the buildings we weren't able to make it, so we introduced some others. So yeah, that was the building side of the map. I was the photographer, as you mentioned, but there are a couple of others, architects, professors who were introduced to descriptions of the buildings and all other stuff that was included in the map. So I wasn't the only one who was working on the map, just the shooting site and the preparing of the photos. The interesting thing was that in the same period that we started working on the map, I was working on a couple of similar projects for the architects that were building in that period. We were working on a couple of exhibitions that were, some of them were here in Skopje, some were in Athens, some in Vienna, and some other places I don't remember. All about these modernist buildings from that period. So when I was introduced to work for this map, and after I finished the material, I continued working on this type of project as I was so interested from the feedback that I was given from the people who live in Skopje. Because usually people are every day passing through those streets around those buildings, but they didn't pay attention so much to the buildings. And when they see on the photos, they were like so much surprised, and they become the essence of getting so much memory from the past about the buildings, about the earthquakes, about their parents or some older who are living around those neighborhoods or around those buildings. Some are apartment buildings, some are public buildings or some administrations or so much more. So yeah, that was happening for a couple of years. And I was interested to publish a book about that, but it's still in some kind of building process. And a couple of months ago, I was searching through my archive of photos, and I said to me, maybe this type of photos that I took 5 or 7 years ago, when will be published in after a while, the images will worth even more because of the time difference that will happen. So maybe this book that I didn't publish in that period is even better. I don't know. Or maybe I'm lazy, so that's a good excuse. Why didn't I did it in the period that was so actual?
You're letting it age like wine.
Yeah, exactly. maybe. And in the same period, it was so interested all around the world about the modernist architecture. I mean, there is still, but in that period, it was especially popular to talk about this type of architecture. So maybe I need some distance from that period to have some space. I don't know. We'll see.
Yeah, but that's really, really interesting. And it's really cool that you thought about this project beyond just this map. Like you said, there were other things going on as well.
Yes.
And then you thought of something like just from yourself, like this book. And that's very cool. You mentioned a lot of things here. And one thing I wanted to maybe just focus a little bit more on is the local perception. So like you said, it evoked a reaction because those buildings are, for people of Skopje, those buildings are something they see every day. When you live in a place, you just walk past, you don't think sometimes, you don't always have the time to stop and be like, okay, this is different from everything else. So do you think that the reaction that it created was more of sentimental value, or do you think it was something that maybe it just happened in the moment, but then people maybe don't think about these buildings now? Because like you said, there was a period of time when modernism was very influential, interesting, and maybe that time has passed. What do you think now people maybe think about these buildings which they are surrounded by?
I think that in that period when I was publishing all those images of the buildings, that was the peak of the interest in these people who are living in Skopje. But now I think that everything is going back to the everyday life, and nobody especially cares about this type of things. I'm thinking, why is that? Because usually people who are interested or are working in architectural sphere, those are the people who are more occupied about this kind of all other, not so much interested. I mean, when there is something is happening, yes. When there is some exhibition, maybe. When somebody published some interesting images of that, yes. When like I said, the map was published and all the fame that came from the map. That was the interesting period. And maybe that's why those kinds of things has to be happening to
keep the interest going.
I'm happy that I was involved in those kinds of projects which had some kind of input about this kind of stuff. Because first of all, I'm not a type of architectural photographer which works only on this kind of building. I usually every day work as a commercial architectural photographer, like shooting hospitality buildings, like everyday apartments, buildings, rentals, and similar stuff, which is my regular job. So this was a very interesting project for me as a profession, because I was like on a boot camp for shooting every day, almost every day, for sometimes for 8 or 10 hours out with a camera, with all that things that are happening on the street. Like everyone is looking that you are around some building and is something that is suspicious. What you are doing here, why you are with camera, what is the television network that you're working for, whatever. And so, that was very interesting experience for me. So to continue to work as I'm working almost 15 years as an architectural photographer. So I was moving the subject to something else which is correlate with some of these things. So we can continue with other things that you're interested in.
Yeah, of course. I mean, architecture is everything. It's not just modernism. And I guess leading on from that, one thing that has been very interesting in Skopje's recent history is, the other metamorphosis which happened just over 1 decade ago. Again, I think since 1963, this is probably the first time there's been such a big change and big project in Skopje. So that is something that obviously had its own vision. It was very different. And how do you think that this new project actually fits with the urban fabric now? And what do you think is kind of the idea behind it?
When we are talking about Skopje 2014, first of all, I didn't accept that project from the beginning. Nobody was thinking that kind of project will be at all. We were making laugh about all of that when we saw the first drawings and some visualization. But after a while, it started, and some of the buildings are still building, even after all those things that happened. I wasn't so much interested in that kind of architecture like modernism and all that stuff in that period, but I didn't like the project personally. And because in that period I was living exactly in the center of Skopje, where all the new buildings from the project were building all around the building. And I was literally trying to pass by all those buildings, and I didn't want to see them to exist. So I just passed by them or from some other ways to just pass. But in that time, I'm very sorry that I didn't recognize the importance of capturing all the space that we had before this project. But I recognized that after the building of the map and all the other projects, which I'm really sorry about that. I didn't have the material from before. But yeah, the project, it's very controversial. There are still people who hate it, and there are still people who like it. And from the architectural standpoint, I don't think that's natural for our city, but I don't know what we can do right now. There were a couple of projects that I were thinking about. I think one of the projects was Venice Biennale, about how we can continue with the project in some way to use it, the building that they exist, but all of that was only presentation of the Biennale and nothing else, of course. What will happen with this type of buildings? I don't know. The only thing that I know is that this type of project, especially if you see some of the buildings that are in the center of the city that was masked behind all those facades, it's very clear what wanted the project to be, because if you see the building from the front side is with the new facade from the project, and if you see the same building from the behind, it's the old facade from after the earthquake. So that tells a lot about the project. I mean, from mine's point of view.
Yeah, that's very interesting that actually, in a way, I guess the legacy post-earthquake still kind of continues.
Yes.
Even with the different facade and the new, I guess, vision for the center of Skopje. And I guess talking about these buildings being left, how do you see that these modernist buildings, the post-earthquake buildings, aging? Like, in what way do you think they are aging? Are they just being left to exist and nothing else? I mean, we spoke about the local context. It's kind of like every time, like you said, there is something happening, it brings the attention back, but then it dies down. So there is not really a continuous movement. Just about the building itself, since there are these new facades and new buildings, what do you think is happening to the rest, which are just left?
If you're talking about the modernist architecture from after the earthquake, there's a good thing that the modernism, the concrete is so hard material, so it's almost indestructible, as opposed to the new building from the project 2014, which is styrofoam and other materials, which are half of the buildings are destroyed from the weather and from other elements. So the good thing, I said, that these buildings still survive all those periods. And even though that the people and the government and the locals doesn't care about those buildings, they still exist and they're almost indestructible. The only thing that happened after this project was that most of those popular buildings were surrounded by the new buildings of the project, so it's even harder to take a photo of them or to see, or some of them they make makeup of the building so you can't recognize it anymore. So
they still exist in spite of everything.
In some way they still exist. Yeah. I mean, we had luck that we had the modernist architecture, so that's why.
Yeah, and like you said, I mean, then they are still there, but maybe they're in the shadows of something new, of a different vision of Skopje that's come about recently. But going back to the map and I guess your input in it, I'd be very interested to know, how did the collaboration start? And maybe what was the vision that was presented or that was created for this map?
As I said before, I already had some of the material that was in the map for other projects. And when I was introduced to the project from the beginning, I wasn't so interested about the map because I didn't saw the input of this map to the city or to our country or to our city. But after I was talking with some of the architects who are working to this type of subjects, they were so surprised that we have a chance to be introduced in this kind of project internationally. So I thought, okay, maybe we can do something like this. Even though from the beginning I wasn't so interested, because I was more interested to work locally with our team that we were working. But when the map was published and when I saw so much recognized things that happened to the city and to the country from this map, I was so surprised. I didn't expect that something like that. So yeah, in a way, it was a good and a bad thing from the beginning, but at the end, it was quite nice experience. Yeah, we continue doing similar projects. I mean, not maps, but some other presentations, some exhibitions, as I said, in this type of thing. So yeah.
That's really interesting, actually, that, especially that you mentioned that you wanted to do something more locally. And I'm guessing the architects and all the other people that were consulted were local? Yes, okay.
Yeah, they are.
Yeah, so it's quite nice, actually, that even though the company which creates the maps is from the UK, a lot of the input was actually also given to people from Skopje. And I think that's really, really nice, because hopefully you were able to show the things that you thought that Skopje was or should be represented by. And I guess going back to something you mentioned about the international audience. So the project did aim to raise international awareness, not only of modernist legacy, because there are also other maps of different cities which have different architectural legacies. But do you think after this, and also the events that you mentioned, beyond the map, do you think that it was able to achieve its purpose? I know you said that maybe in the, architecture groups and communities, potentially was more fruitful than in everyday life for other people. But I'm just wondering what you think about this.
I'm not sure how much impact had to the map. I hope that the people who are interested in Skopje, especially those who are interested in the history and architecture, can find those type of information about the map, about the images and that I created, and some others who are creating this type of materials. So yeah, there is, but how much I don't know. I don't have any information about that. But yeah, the thing is that if there is some kind of material that you can find it online or whatever, it will have some kind of impact. First of all, the way you find me to have this podcast is one of the things. Yeah, there is some kind of impact, but how much, I don't know.
Of course. I mean, personally, for me, before I came to volunteer in Skopje this year, I was in Skopje 2 years ago. And actually, one of the things that drew me to the city before I came was, of course, I Googled the place. I wanted to see what it looked like. And it was those buildings. Of course, there are other reasons as well. But yeah, I thought they were very interesting and I wanted to see them. So I'm sure that maybe for also people who are casually traveling or something, it has had an impact. I mean, I'm sure there are more people, not just me. So I hope that's also reached a bigger audience. And I think it did, especially since there are maps of other cities as well. Like the way I discovered the map of Skopje was through a map of a different city, was through a map of Tbilisi. So I'm sure there are also other casual enthusiasts of architecture that this has had some form of impact on, which I think is very cool, at least from a personal experience.
Yeah, of course.
Okay, I guess given all of this is quite an open question, but do you think there is anything else that could be done to ensure that this modernist legacy continues? So there is a map, it has aimed to reach an international audience. Do you think there is anything else that realistically can be done to raise awareness or interest? Or do you think it's just about continuing some sort of exhibitions, projects, and keeping it in that kind of sphere?
Yes. I think that continue with, like you say, exhibitions and some other type of projects which are introducing all those informations to the public, is the crucial part of this. Something else that can happen is that the locals and the government or who are interested in this type of things has to support this kind of projects and to be part of that. I was so surprised that a company from UK came to me and asked to did the map for Skopje, which is counterintuitive. That has to be, from my perspective of view, done from local. I mean, we have to do it ourselves to present our city, our architectural and all that stuff that we have, but that didn't happen, which is a shame. But I hope that maybe in the future they will recognize this after all those things that we've done. So I don't know, maybe that's the way.
So it's a first step. It's
Maybe,
a first good step.
Yeah.
And it's interesting that it had to come internationally from abroad, from the other side of Europe.
And usually on the Balkans, I don't know how it's in other places, but when you did something abroad or from abroad, it's more respected if in difference when you did something local, which is a good thing from the beginning. But I hope that it will continue to work in the same way.
Of course. I mean, it would be amazing if the people of Skopje had all the impact on its environment and urban space, because it's a very interesting place. You have 3 different buildings from 3 different times next to each other, yes. And they look very, sometimes strange next to each other, but yes. It's something that is definitely very unique to this city, and not many cities have this kind of, I guess, tension between buildings and the space.
As you mentioned that, for example, in the same space you have the Turkish bazaar, in the same space you have architectural from the modernist, from before modernist, and some of the buildings that still exist, and you can find from this period, which is very interesting. So
it's amazing. Well, Vase, thank you so much for sharing your thoughts and expertise with us. I hope this glimpse into Skopje's architecture was equally as insightful to our listeners, and that you've had a chance to learn a bit more about modernism in this very unique context. In the meantime, we hope you tune in to the next Voices to Hear episode, and make sure to check out Vase's work on his website and Instagram page. See you soon.
Voices to Hear.